there than you are. And to be a sailor. And I was just 17. And I had to get a Coast Guard card that would allow me to serve on ships. And so, luckily, there was a Jewish junior officer in the Coast Guard office in Philadelphia who said, "I'll take care of it." And he did, and he gave me a Merchant Marine card, which has the name I was using at the time, and I was good to go. I wasn't sure where I was going, why I was going. I was a kid. I was not a verbrannter Zionist, as my father would say. That means a burning Zionist for those of you who are not with Yiddish. How many of you do understand Yiddish? Okay, so let me tell you, my story is a bissel und a bissel macht a vollen Schüssel. What does that mean? A little and a little makes a lot.
Big Schüssel.
And the other one my mother taught me is a mensch esst and a chazer frisst. So that you got it. All right. We got on a ship in New York, in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, a ship that was a former ship of the Canadian Navy. At that time, it held a crew of 120 people. When it was transferred and rebuilt in order to run the British blockade, remember, the British had a blockade blocking any ships that were headed with refugee survivors to Palestine. And so we had to run their blockade because it was illegal to transport Jewish survivors to their land. My job was the lowest ranking on the ship. I was a wiper. That means below the decks, I wiped up the oil. And we started from New York, and we traveled with the ship all the way to Ponta Delgada in the Azores. And keep in mind, everybody on that ship was not a professional sailor. There were World War II veterans, Jewish veterans, and some non-Jewish veterans, but they were not sailors. So the only real sailors on the ship was the captain, the chief engineer, and the radio operator. And the rest of us just stood on the sides and were sick. But I was blessed at that time because for some reason I learned how to roll with the ship, and so I survived that. Our ship barely made it to the Azores. That's the entrance to the Mediterranean, because there were all kinds of problems with the ship. And in the Azores, we got the ship repaired, and we had to be very, very careful. The name of our ship when we left New York was the Bahar Noi from Panama City. What, they're transferring survivors? The Panamanian government was one of the few governments in the world who you could buy, if you paid enough, a flag. So it said Bahar Noi on the ship, Panama City, and that is the ship. Let me just tell you this part. We finally made it to Italy, to a place in Italy, a port called Savona. We came on that same ship. And there, the Italian guys who fought against Mussolini, they had united and agreed they would do the work of taking these ships and transforming them, of taking our destroyer that held 125 to when we left. When we left Italy, over 12,000 Napoli, 12,000 people were on the ship. Obviously, they were not living in any kind of comfort. There was no luxury. They had to be fed, and they had to take turns, and we had to build other facilities for them. And we told them this was going to our home. You are now going somewhere where you will be greeted warmly and embraced and taken in. Great. As we approached Haifa, it was one of the most beautiful scenes I've ever seen. And I'm learning slowly about my people. And I'm slowly beginning to understand our history. And I was not aware of this thing, as was the case with so many other people. And we told the passengers, try to stay below the decks as much as possible because we want to avoid the British destroyers. They're out there to stop us. That was their intent. When we finally reached close to Haifa, there was no controlling the passengers. They looked up at the mountain, they looked at Haifa, they looked at the port, and they saw hundreds and hundreds of people waving to them with Israeli flags and saying, "You're home, you're home, you're home." And in whatever little room was there, they're dancing the hora and they're singing, and the more Orthodox are doing other things as well. And boy, it's the whole Jewish nation on one ship. And they stopped us and said, turn around and go back. They had done that again and again. One time, when the people got back, they were so desperate, they blew up the ship, and many of them died. And we had prepared big signs that said, "We are the Josiah Wedgwood. The blood of Hitler is on our hands. Now it will be on your hands." Somehow it didn't take. So we were unloaded, and those of us who were American and Canadian volunteers, we were given the same immigration card that was given to every one of the passengers. An official card from the Yeshuv at that time, saying that we were now welcome and we were now officially citizens of the Jewish land, yet to be a state. And I still have that. I still have that. We got off the ship and we knew we were going to another camp. This one was a detention camp in a place called Atlit. Barbed wire, towers, dogs, British troops with clubs, big showers, compulsory, big dining rooms where you ate with hundreds and hundreds of others, where you were shepherded to wherever you were going. And this was what we had promised would be the end of all that. What happened suddenly that got the attention of the United States of America and the world? You ready for this? The most significant player was the movie The Exodus. How many of you saw The Exodus? Do you remember the music? How stirring it was? And the story? Later, when I saw the movie, I wanted to play the role of Sal Mineo, but it was already late. It got the attention of the world. The movie was shown again and again. The music was played again and again. And then, that was the beginning of the Aliyah Bet. Our group was called Aliyah Bet. Aliyah Aleph means going up, and it's legal. Aliyah Bet meant it was illegal. And we were part of Pal Yam. Did you show the logo there? All right, buy the book, you'll see the logo. That's what we were. We got off the ship, and we were taken by truck and bus to the elite camp. And I want to tell you one story about camp. Aside from the fact when the people saw the showers, because that's where they had to go, and the barbed wire, and the guards with clubs and guns, it was almost impossible to control them. But we then had about 12 Israeli Sabras, Israeli-born who were in the Haganah, who were there, and they helped by getting them to say, if I say, we just came from there, you're going there, we're here to help you, and that was very helpful. And I'll tell you the kind of place the dining room was, and how naive I was as a young man. You go through a line and they take food and they put it in a tin can like you do with GIs, and then you go back to your table and you eat. In the middle of each table is a large bowl, a aluminum bowl, called a kalboinik. I had no idea what a kalboinik was until I was so hungry, I reached into that and put food in this container. And everybody started to laugh, because that's where everybody was emptying what they couldn't eat. And I was known throughout the camp. American. American. He thinks wherever he goes, he can eat. So I was determined at that point to get out of there as quickly as possible. And fortunately, I was one of the people who, they had an area in the back of the camp where the wire had been cut, and we were taking groups of the Olim out there. And the British saw us doing this. But then they said, you know, what are we going to do with them now? There's no way we're going to stop them. The ships didn't stop them, the guns didn't stop them, Auschwitz didn't stop them, displaced person camps didn't stop. They're serious. This is it. And we all made it. And a short while later, I came home. My parents really didn't know where I was. In fact, I must tell you this. Last year at Beth Israel, I was invited to give a talk to a class of 5th graders about my journey. And, you know, kids are amazing. Adults are so sensitive about, I gotta be careful what I say, politically, socially, what will people think. The kids are just wonderful. And this little girl raises her hand and says, Dr. Gottlieb, how did you feel about lying to your mother? You know, what should I resort to? There are even times when you should lie to her. No way that's going to happen. And so I was back, and I had never finished high school. So I had to start there. And because of my beloved brother Norman, who recently died, I just wanted to, he was a ninja. And he was a lawyer. a University of Michigan graduate. And he had a job doing GEDs, General Education Development things, the things that qualify you for high school. He said, listen, there's a quote on how many grades you can finish at a time, but I'm here. You write them, send them to me, and we'll move along. In a very short period of time, I was officially a high school graduate, and that was coming back. When I came back and I was accepted to the University of Chicago, and this is not, I'm not tooting a horn, because I want to explain something to you. When I started out, I was strictly, at most, an ethnic Jew, not a religious Jew. You know, I love Fiddler on the Roof more than anybody. My bar mitzvah was in Yiddish because my parents were socialists, and I went to the Shalom Aleichem Volksschule, and my bar mitzvah was in Yiddish, the whole works, and I didn't know or didn't grasp yet the faith part. But as time went on, I had to explain to myself, mostly to myself, how does a Jewish kid from Detroit, son of immigrant parents who couldn't speak English, 86 years later, end up in one of the most conservative, fundamentalist communities in America? There I was. And I remember when the ship I got to go back to America, the only one I could get on was one that was going to Beaumont, Texas. I didn't know Beaumont, Texas was beans. All I know is when I got on the train, it was a segregated train, and I couldn't sit here and I couldn't stand there. And when we got to Beaumont, it was so hot we were sleeping on the deck, but we couldn't because we were smeared by mosquitoes out of nowhere. And I thought to myself, I don't want it. I'm out of here. And why did it happen? I finally came up with a Hebrew word that solved my problem. How did you get from here to there? Why did somebody intervene at that time who you didn't know? Bestert. Destiny. It had to happen. It had to happen. And that series of happenings, by the way, I had the good fortune to meet my wife. She's a Bestert plus. No, but really, because when you read the book, you'll see when I was getting my Ph.D. at the University of Chicago, my professor was an eminent sociologist named Peter Rossi, and I was in his seminar class. In the first class, after the class, he called me over and he said, Gottlieb, I want to tell you something. You got to learn to swallow before you bite. You're taking me on in my seminar class? What are you, nuts? You're not going anywhere. And he became Bestert number one. Why me? Because when I finally graduated and was going to my first job at Michigan State University, he said, here are the things you need to do. He didn't say, here's my advice. He said, here's what you do. And I followed what he said I should do, in large part because he was there to help me, and the other was I enjoyed everything he told me to do. Because everything he told me to do, I would get more opportunities to stand in front of a microphone and talk and have attention. And I finally decided that was something terribly important to me. But truth is, I did a good job. And one of the things I did is I organized my students in a class to become volunteers to work with at-risk, low-income kids as tutors. For start number 2, who was the governor of Michigan at that time? Mitt Romney's father, George. Now, he would have been a candidate. But that's not why.
He was.
Mitt Romney reads about this program, and he invites me to Lansing and gives me a certificate and said, I want this program all over Michigan, and I'll take care of doing it. You just need to coordinate it. Which led very quickly to a call from the Office of Sergeant Shriver in Washington and the Office of Economic Opportunity and War on Poverty. I want you here, come here, and I did, and most wonderful man, charismatic. I said, I'm in, and what am I going to do? And he said, I want you to handle the Job Corps, the Youth Employment Training Program. And I did, and then something happened. He and I were testifying before a Senate committee, and one of the most conservative of the senators stood up and said, Sarge, that's the way they talk to Trump, Sarge, how much money do we pay for these kids a year? How much money is the government paying them to get training or whatever? And Shriver gives me a nudge, and he said, go ahead, hotshot. So he said, Shriver said, I have with me Dr. Gottlieb, who is an eminent sociologist, well known for his work with disadvantaged youth. And somebody said, come on, cut the crap. Are we going to get an answer here? So I stood up and I said, Senator, $7,000 a year to feed them, educate them, give them medical care, counsel them, and prepare them to become productive and responsible citizens. $7,000, that's more than it costs for me to send my son to Harvard. And then Shriver looks at me again with that no. And I said, Senator, you tell me how many of these kids Harvard will take, and we'll send you 7,000 for each one. And Orrin Hatch, who was chairing it, he applauded, and he said to Shriver, you better take the good doctor wherever you go. No, that was another, because that got me known in academia, and I was offered a job at UT and the University of Houston at the same time. And I knew I didn't want to go to Austin. I didn't think I was cut out for that. And I knew that U of H had the reputation of Jagger, or what was it called, high school? Cougar. But I wanted to be near a city, and so I went there. And what happens? George Mitchell, the king of the woodlands, one of the great energy giants, he wants to borrow me, loan me, get a loan on me to come work for him because he wanted to start a new educational campus in the woodlands. And so I went to work for him. I took a leave of absence and went to work for him. So I met George Mitchell, and that's how I got into be the president and CEO of the Cynthia Woods Mitchell Pavilion. I'm a great authority on things like that. I never even managed a 2-car funeral, for God's sake. And I'm in there, and I'm doing my thing, and we're doing well. And I get to know George Mitchell and Cynthia Mitchell. And how is that possible? How is that possible? And he invited me to one of his board meetings. You know, energy guys. Most of them were guys. In fact, they were all guys. They're all white. They all had white hair. And he said, I want you to introduce you to Dr. Gottlieb. he's a socialist.
Mm.
Mr. Mitchell, sociologist. So what does he say to that board? Anybody here tell me, what's the difference between the two? But that was meant to happen. And that was followed by civilian, and then finally, this also had to be restored. I end up a senior officer in a bank. Me. Banks, finance, capitalism, exploitation. That's not my cup of tea. Yes, dear. My wife is playing.
Yeah, you're okay.
All right, listen. In any event, how did I finally get through? The father of an Israeli whose name is Mishi Nubach. Some of you have heard him and have seen him. He is a travel guide for Omega Travel, which is the Methodist church in the Woodlands. And every year they have hundreds of Christians who want to go to the Holy Land. The Jews want to go to Israel, they want to go to Holy Land. And Mishi heard that I had been on the Aliyah bed ship. And when he inquired what the ship was, it was the Wedgwood. I said, the Wedgwood. It turns out that Mishi's father, when the Second World War ended, was in the British Army. He got discharged on third class. Anyway, so it turns out that when we go to get our passengers from the displaced person camp in Italy, who is leading them onto the ship? Mishi's father. Now, if that doesn't stare at you, nothing will. Mishi got together with the former rabbi of Congregation Beth Shalom, Rabbi Brown, and they got together and they said, "You are now a match." And I thought, Rabbi? A shaliach? Sabra? It's got to be true. So I claim, not perfect mensch, but certainly a mitzvah. And the lady is saying this. So the
You
book
can talk
is.
as long as you like. You just asked me to.
No,
check it out.
as those of you who would be interested in buying the book, but let me have questions too, please.